and welcome back to Let's Talk Tech, brought to you by Sine Wave Technologies. In today's video, we're going to talk about IP address network classes and how to identify your network and host portions. Grouping is the easiest way to organize something. Take your dresser, for example. You may have a drawer for your socks, maybe one for your pants, and another for your shirts. By grouping your clothes and designating a certain drawer for certain articles of clothing, you can minimize the time it takes you to find what you need. The same concept works for IP addresses, and we call this grouping classful routing. The benefit of grouping is to make the routing process more efficient. Classful routing was introduced in 1981 and divides IPv4 addresses into 5 classes, A through E. But for today's video, we will just cover A through C because D and E are not allocated to host. Before we continue, you must know that this concept follows the idea that IP addresses are split into 2 parts: the network portion, which identifies the group, and the host portion, which identifies the members of the group. Because not all networks are the same size, classes were created to help define them. The IP addresses that are grouped together will have either the first octet in common, the first and second octet in common, or the first, second, and third octet in common. For example, Class A, which is for larger networks, the network portion is the first octet, and the second, third, and fourth octet is the host portion. Networks that are grouped together in Class A will have the first octet in common. Class B, which is for medium-sized networks, has octets 1 and 2 as the network portion, and 3 and 4 as the host portion. And Class C, which is for smaller networks, has octets 1 through 3 as the network portion, and 4 as the host. Let me explain things a bit further. We said that an IP address can be split into 2 portions, network and host. The network is a group and the host is a member in the group, or in this case would be all of the devices within a network. To explain why Class A is for larger networks, we know that in this class, the first octet is used for the network portion and the rest are for the host. This means that there are 3 more octets left to number host, so there is a huge number of hosts available in a Class A network. For Class B networks, the first 2 octets are used for the network portion, and only the last 2 are left for host. Because of this, we can create more Class B networks than Class A, but Class A has more hosts available under the network. This is also true for Class C. Class C has the first 3 octets for the network and only 1 octet for the host. So we can create a lot more of these than we can Class A's and B's, but each Class C is going to be small because the host portion is only 1 octet, and 1 octet's maximum value is 255. Now that we have discussed the 3 classes, you might be wondering how you can identify whether an IP address falls within a Class A, B, or C network. Each class falls within a range, and you can actually identify an IP address's class based off the first octet. Class A is 1 through 126, or 1.0.0.0 through 126.0.0.0. Class B is 128 through 191, or 128.0.0.0 through 191.255.00, because Class B's can occupy the first 2 octets. And lastly, Class C's are 192 through 223, or 192.0.0.0 through 223.255.255.0, because they can occupy the first 3 octets for the network portion. Based on what we've learned so far, let's look at a few examples and identify their classes and its 2 portions. Looking at the last video's IPv4 address example, 172.16.254.1, we can assume that since the first octet is 172, this address falls into the Class B because it's between 128 and 191. We also know that Class B uses the first 2 octets as the network portion, making the last 2 octets the host portion. If this address started with a 200, then we could say that this was a class C, and the network portion would now be the first 3 octets, and the last octet is the host portion. What class is your IP address? Well, that's all for today's video. If you've enjoyed this series so far and want to learn more about technology, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified about our next video. If you have any further questions or just want to follow along to learn more tech, check out our social media linked below in the description or take a look at our website at sinewavetech.com. I hope you all have a great weekend, and I will see you next week on Let's Talk Tech.